All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Happy Wednesday. We're so glad you've joined us today for our webinar, How to Make Your Mission Impossible to Ignore. But before we begin, I just want to share a few quick housekeeping notes. I have muted everybody, but if you have a need to unmute yourself, you are able to, but just to minimize distractions and background noise. We are recording this session and it will be available on our website in the next few days. So be on the lookout for that. I have turned on the captions, but if you find that to be distracting, you are able to turn that off using the settings at the bottom of your screen. We warmly welcome your questions. You can type them in the chat box as they come to you. We'll have some time at the end for Q&A. And if you haven't found the chat box yet, go ahead and locate that and feel free to share your name and what organization you're with so we can see who's joined us today. But we're so delighted to have Jessica, and we look forward to a great informative webinar. On to you.
Great. Well, hi everyone. I'm Jesica D'Avanza, and I am so glad you chose to hang out with me for an hour today. I know you could be doing 100 different things and probably should be, and I don't take this time together for granted at all. So, really excited. I think we're going to have some fun, and I promise that you're going to leave with some things that you can immediately log off and start applying to your everyday work. So, let's dive in. I always like to say that I was never really meant to be here. And by here, I don't mean on this Zoom, but I mean working for an organization that supports nonprofits instead of being inside a nonprofit. I spent the first 15 years of my career working for large, fairly complex nonprofits, the American Cancer Society, the Muscular Dystrophy Association, and that was always the plan. I had always planned to continue to lead communications, marketing, brand management for these organizations. And something happened along the way. There was this common theme that continued to arise and emerge where many of our C-suite leaders, no matter how great the communications were, would turn to us and say, well, gosh, if only we had a better ad campaign, if only we had a better brand campaign, if only we had, then our fundraising would be fixed and our donor recruitment would be better and all of our problems would be solved. And as all of we all know on this call, communications doesn't live in one department. Our brands are not the responsibility of one team. And I started to think, gosh, there has to be a better way. Business strategy, organizational strategy is inextricably linked with brand strategy. And what might happen if we started thinking about it in that way? And hence, Round Square was born. So I am the founder and chief strategy officer of Round Square. We are a brand strategy and identity agency that is solely and wholly focused on nonprofits and mission-driven organizations. We spend our days doing things like naming, branding, logo development, brand identity, messaging, positioning, sales decks, content marketing for some of the most amazing organizations on this planet. Many of you are on this call, so good to see some of your names. And up in the top corner there, you might even see Nonprofit Leadership Center, who's so kind enough to host us today. We're also very privileged to do all the day-to-day communication support for them. So shout out, glad you're here. And they offer some really amazing programs and continued learning opportunities for you as well. So I'd say one of the biggest problems or challenges, opportunities, however you'd like to call it, that we work on every day is helping nonprofits kind of conquer that age-old question of, oh, it's so hard to explain what we do, as well as, so what, right? So today, I'd like to start with a little story where all good communicators start, so we can talk a little bit about what we mean when we're talking about your brand and why it really matters. So I have a 9-year-old. And in our family, Halloween's a really big deal. I promise some embarrassing photos. So anyone who saw my post on LinkedIn, we're trying to make good with that here. But we have been just about everyone under the sun. Our very first Halloween, we were the Three Little Pigs. We were Wizard of Oz before Wicked was as cool as Wicked is now. We've been Frozen, Super Mario Bros. I think Toad was my favorite costume. Trolls. But when my daughter turned 2, we decided to go as Peter Pan, Wendy, and Tinkerbell. And some of you have heard me speak before, may have heard this story, but it's worth telling again. And I, being the very type A neurotic person I am, everyone who knows me in real life knows that's true, if there are any of you on the call, I decided to make sure that we had our costumes really early that year. Didn't want anything to be wrong, wanted everything to be prepared. And so in September, I ordered our costumes, and the Peter Pan costume came, the Tinkerbell costume came, and eventually there was an Amazon box on my doorstep. And I opened it up, and I was expecting to see my great Wendy costume, right? And in the box, there was no blue dress, there was no blue sash, there was no blue bow. When I opened up was a Spider-Man unitard. And yes, that is me wearing the Spider-Man unitard for that one time and one time only because it was too weird and too funny to not try it on, right? But my point in sharing this with you is that oftentimes, as nonprofits and organizations in general, from a communication standpoint, we focus on that Amazon truck. What's the new digital strategy? What's the new AI tool? What's the shiny new object? What's the trend that we're missing? And we don't focus enough on what's in the box. From a perspective of my experience with this costume, Amazon did everything right. They were awesome with customer service. They replaced the costume really quickly. I mean, it was all great, came fast, everything was great. But what I remember was not getting that Wendy costume. So as we think about our communications, what's in the box really matters. All of the tech and the tools and the channels and the merging innovation, that's all important too. But if we don't get what's in the box right, our brand promise, what we do, how we do it, why it matters, the foundation, none of the rest of it matters. And just for the record, the Wendy costume did come. We were Peter Pan, Tinkerbell, and Wendy, and all was well. But what I would ask you all is to think about as we start this conversation and talk about your communications and how to strengthen your communications and what a brand is. We love Jeff Bezos' quote, continuing with our Amazon analogy. Your brand is what other people say about you when you're not in the room. And by that, I don't mean trolls on the internet or social media. I mean people who have received your email, who have seen your posts on social media, who've come to one of your events, what they've experienced with you. What are they saying after that? What are they thinking? What are they feeling? That is who you are, regardless of who you say you are. And so we really want to tap into that. When I talk about a brand, it's really not about obviously a logo or a message. It's really about a mindset. So as we enter this conversation together today, I want you just to remember that. So what does this all mean for me? What I'd love to spend the balance of our time doing is sharing 5 core principles that we use every day with the nonprofits that we support. These all stem from the most common mistakes or challenges we see nonprofits run into and how we overcome them from a communications standpoint. So let's dive in. Number 1, avoid the curse of knowledge. Not sure if any of you have ever heard of this term, but it was actually a term that was coined by a group of researchers way back in 1989. And the concept is simple, or seems simple. When we know a lot about something, it's easy for us to assume that other people know about it too. The problem is, if our audiences don't understand a concept, service, what we mean when we say equitable education or systemic change or social impact or any other kind of insert jargon here that we tend to use in our sector, they can't love it. They can't support it. They can't feel engaged. They can't feel emotionally connected. And so our job is to really think about how do we break this curse of knowledge. You all may have seen some of these floating around on LinkedIn. I saw them from Johan Carlson, but he shared this on LinkedIn saying, what if some of the biggest brands in the world talked like nonprofits talk? Nike, instead of what they talk about in terms of empowering every person with a body who's an athlete. We provide footwear enabling targeted populations to undertake physical activity. Or Apple, we encourage affected communities to adopt alternative approaches to cognition and problem solving, right? We love to do this in the nonprofit sector. And sometimes it's simply to try to be more concise, to fit more ideas into fewer words. But we often forget that it doesn't necessarily mean anything to those who we serve. So let me give you a quick example, and then we'll get into how we can break some jargon. So a couple of years ago, I took my daughter to the public library near my house, and she was interested in learning more about the body. And we picked up this awesome book, and I was so struck by how it was talking to kids about what genes, Gene, were and explaining it. So I thought, I'm gonna go on Google and do a search and see what the definition of genes are. And the first thing that popped up was a definition from the National Cancer Institute. And you don't need to read this, but the point is that it's quite complex. Its genes are made up of sequences of DNA and they're arranged one after another at specific locations on chromosomes in the nucleus of cells. And it goes on to making specific proteins that lead to expressions of characteristics. I had to read it 3 or 4 or 5 times just to kind of get my brain around it. But in this book that was designed for children, it said genes are instructions that build every part of you. Wow, I didn't have to be a scientist. I didn't have to know every detail, but I knew that genes were instructions that built every part of me. I inherit some from one parent, some from another. That's why my eyes might be like my mom's, but my hair the same as my dad's. And so what would happen if we thought about our issues and initiatives and programs like a student and like this anatomy book did so well for genes? So let's look at a real example. One of the ways to do this and to kind of start to break down jargon is to make things that are really difficult easier to understand. So I mentioned to you that I spent some time at the Muscular Dystrophy Association. And while I was there, we transitioned from the Jerry Lewis Telethon and then rebranded the organization. And when I got there, the organization was using this umbrella term because there's actually 43 different diseases under the nonprofit, neuromuscular diseases. Now, many people have heard of muscular dystrophy. A lot of people don't actually know someone with the condition because it's a very rare condition, but they don't know anyone with many of the other conditions underneath. Most people have never even heard of some of these diseases because they're so rare. And so, as you think about that, they talking about neuromuscular diseases, they're progressive and life-threatening and robust therapeutic development pipeline and all of these things. We also did some research that showed that donors, consumers, customers really didn't understand what neuromuscular disease was, and if they even heard another umbrella term like muscle disease, it didn't feel urgent enough to them. They thought maybe it's just muscle soreness or weakness. And so we thought to ourselves, how do we make something that you may not know someone, you may not have any context, something difficult that you don't have an experience with, easier to understand? And so, one way to do that is to think about what everyone can understand and what everyone cares about. And those are some basic freedoms and activities that we all cherish that many people take for granted. The freedom to walk, to talk, to run and play, to laugh, to hug, to eat, to breathe. Each day, these everyday freedoms are taken away by these conditions. MDA fights to give them back so that people can live longer and grow stronger. So we've really tapped into something that anyone can understand to help people understand what happens when families and individuals are living with some of the conditions that MDA shared about. So making something difficult easier to understand. So here's your jargon busting checklist. When we go through this, take a screenshot, put it on your desk, and these are going to be some simple ways to try to bust some of that jargon that is so easy to fall into. So first, test your copy on someone outside your organization, your neighbor, your best friend, um, a friend on LinkedIn. We've got hundreds of people on this webinar today. Someone that you know from another organization. Test your copy and see, does it resonate? Do they understand what you actually meant or intended? Did it move them emotionally? That quick gut check from someone outside can really help bring some insights to you in terms of areas that you might need to tweak or clarify. Remember that body book. Think like a student, right? Can a sixth grader understand this? Could my kids understand this? Uh, could I understand this if I had just started at the organization? If you think about that curse of knowledge, one of the most powerful opportunities we have is in that first 3 weeks of learning about something or the first 3 or 4 weeks of joining an organization. Remember what it was like when you first joined, or if you're new to your position now, think about that. What was confusing? What didn't make sense? What did you have to learn more about? What didn't emotionally connect? Think about that. Think like a student. Think like a new employee. Okay, don't shoot the messenger here, but we are going to avoid acronyms at all costs. I know we're on a webinar from the Nonprofit Leadership Center that goes by NLC. We're talking about MDA. Certainly, there are some brands who are known for their acronyms. But as you are talking about programs, as maybe you're even talking about yourself, as you're launching new programs, I beg of you to really think about and reduce your use of acronyms, finding different ways like the center, the foundation, the coalition, the alliance. Acronyms are in place to make things easier for us, often not to make it easier for our audience. We've all been in that place where we've had to go back to paragraph one and find out what those parentheses meant so that we can continue following the conversation. We have some nonprofit partners that have programs that are 5-letter acronyms. It just dilutes accessibility and inclusiveness and understanding. And so wherever possible, those acronyms can serve as jargon as well. Use analogies. Again, that's making things that are difficult easier to understand. We, in the first year of our business, we worked with a environmental organization, and they were really complex. I mean, it took 10 minutes to understand what they were. And one of the staff people liked to say, we're like the United Way for the environment. For environmental organizations. And immediately it clicked with people. So I'm not suggesting compare yourself to another organization, but just as an example in terms of analogy that can be used. I also love, because I see we have some friends from the Early Learning Coalition of Hillsborough County on, I love to share this example. I was at their summit earlier this year, and they were talking about the power of the human brain before a child turns 6, from birth to age 5. And there's so many like neural pathways and brain connections happening. And that can lose you really quickly if you're starting to talk about brain science. And the speaker said, before a child it turns 6, their brain is like a NASA supercomputer. Immediately, you can picture that without having to talk about the complexities of brain science. So think about how you can apply some of that in your own world. And then last but not least, talk like your audiences talk. Certainly that doesn't mean don't be professional or don't be polished, but think about how we talk as humans. We rarely say, like, our targeted populations for systemic change. We don't talk like that to one another. So, how would we talk as humans to one another? How do our audiences talk? How do we infuse that warmth and welcomeness and openness and curiosity in the language that we're using? All right. So we're going to tackle jargon, right? Tackle jargon one message at a time. Our second principle that we see all the time and that we are, recommending, kind of avoiding is really stop making it all about you. Now, we all know that we just came off a really busy year-end giving season. I don't know about you, I probably got maybe 57 emails between Giving Tuesday and year-end, and so many of them are about us. Help us meet our goal. We still have $10,000 to meet our goal. It is not about you. It is about them. We need less us, more them. We are the guide as nonprofit. Our audiences, our donors, the people who are helping are the hero. When we can just flip the switch a little bit, it's still all about the organization without being all about the organization. Here's a quick example. And again, no need to read this, just up here for visual purposes. But we had the gift of rebranding a national program for the American Cancer Society about 2 years ago. And they have a catalog that's really critical to this particular program because it goes in all the cancer centers across the country. And so if you open it up, it's for a cancer patient or their family member, you see this. It's all about the American Cancer Society. And so as we sort of started to rebrand and we think about making it less about us and more about them, our audience, we made some shifts. We moved this to the last page. And now instead of being about the American Cancer Society, it's more resources and support to help you through every step of your journey. So it immediately becomes, it's still about us, but it immediately becomes about the audience, the person we're trying to serve. Another thing, another kind of tip to think about is we all have so many programs, right? We have a million different programs. They all have their own names and sub-brands. How can we reframe those with a benefits approach? So you can see here, we've got, Reach to Recovery, Hope Lodge. Instead, find free lodging when treatment requires traveling away from home, instead of leading with a program name that may or may not feel connected to somebody. Or get free rides to and from cancer treatment instead of leading with Road to Recovery. It's not to never share that, but it's just leading with the audience in mind so they can immediately see how you can help them and the benefits versus leading with something that they may or may not know a little bit about. Another thing that you can think about is as we think about making it a little bit less about us and more about them, is I like to say, just look up and around, not just down. As nonprofit professionals, you are so busy. Resources are so constrained. Burnout is rampant. And sometimes it's just like, just to keep it all running, we are just heads down at our computer. But the power and some of the efficiency can come from looking up at what others are doing, looking up and around at what's working, what's not, what are our competitors, I say that, friendly competitors doing that can work, and finally asking our audiences what they need and want. The only way for us to allow them to be the hero and to be more about them and benefits driven for them in terms of what's going to motivate or limit their engagement is to ask them. We spend a lot of time, the work that we do, interviewing donors, community partners, board members, stakeholders, simply trying to get in their head and hearts of what would motivate you to stay engaged? What would motivate you to take the next step? What would hold you back from supporting this organization? And so spending some time, whether that's with a partner or with a member of your internal team, asking your audiences some questions, not only is a wonderful way to show them that you value that they feel valued by you, but also to sharpen your messaging and make sure that it's on point. And before we leave this topic, here are just a couple of the questions that we tend to ask. Of course, we ask many more, but these really get to the heart of it. So I'll just use Nonprofit Leadership Center as an example since we're on their webinar. How would you describe the nonprofit leadership to someone unfamiliar with it? Does the donor or the community partner or whomever it is, a nonprofit leader, do they say what you think you actually do? Is it confusing? Is there a theme that you're seeing with how people are describing you that is positive or negative? Of all of the things the organization does, what's it best at? What should it do differently or better? We also love to ask questions like, how do you think donors perceive the organization? How do you think community partners perceive the organization? How do you think nonprofit leaders perceive the organization? Some of those answers can be very interesting and eye-opening. And then finally, what's the number one reason you first reached out to us? What's the number one reason that you chose to donate to us or become a monthly sustainer? And what does success ultimately look like to you when you think about our organization? From an impact perspective, that can be really interesting. So again, when we talk about not just making it about ourselves, think about asking, think about finding out some of these insights. They can completely transform your communications. All right, so we've talked about avoiding the curse of knowledge, stop making it all about us. Number 3, I'd love for you all to channel your inner poet. Now I know there's a lot of outsourcing going on to Claude and ChatGPT and Gemini these days. And yes, all of what I'm going to share with you, you can teach your large language models and generative AI tools of choice to help you with some of these things so that they're trained on these things too as they assist you in writing or editing some of your materials. But there are 5 kind of quick writing techniques that we like to use to make messages stickier that I'd love to share with you as we think about channeling our inner poet. So first is the rule of 3s. Okay, so research tells us that in our brains, we can really only remember about 3 things at a time. So think about all those programs we have, think about all the things we do. Our audiences can really only remember 3 things. So let's take a look at an example. I'm not sure if we have anyone on the call from the Hillsborough Education Foundation on the call, but it's a wonderful organization that we love and have had the opportunity to do some brand strategy work for them over the years. And before we joined them, they had all of these programs listed on their website. They did 5 kind of buckets of different things. They had 4 programs, areas of impact. And it's not because of a lack of focus, it's because they do so many incredible things that are needed by the school district that they support. And so as you look at these things, they're really hard to remember. They came to us and said, gosh, Jessica, we do so many incredible, important things. We do not know how to talk about ourselves. We'll go down a rabbit hole in one program. We start talking over here. It's just so hard to tell the whole story. So as we talked, we interviewed stakeholders, we looked at everything. What we realized is everything they do actually fall into three categories. And they fall into categories related to the people that they ultimately serve. Rather than programs, it's actually about people. And how we kind of adjusted that for them was students, teachers, and schools. So everything they do for students is really about unlocking opportunities for students, especially those with the greatest needs. Everything they do is about investing in teachers, removing financial barriers, helping them with school supplies, giving them classroom grants and professional development. And then finally, they're all about strengthening public schools, the advocacy work they do. That's all driven toward making sure those top resource schools, those A-rated schools, every school in the community has those same resources. And so it quickly becomes something about people and why donors want to give. They want to give scholarships to students. They want to make sure teachers aren't burned out, rather than a laundry list of programs. So as you think about the programs you do, or even if you think about a program you're launching that may have several components, think about those in threes and think about categorizing all of the things with some high-level buckets so that as someone's interested, then you can go deeper if they want to talk more about, in this case, scholarships or mentoring versus leading with that. Another writing technique that we use on the daily is alliteration. Hopefully, many of you have heard of this and are employing it, but it's essentially when just several words start with the same letter. It helps. It helps improve recall. It helps with kind of stickiness and just the flow and rhythm of language. So we have the privilege of working with Frameworks. They're a nonprofit that really focuses on developing emotional intelligence in young people by working through the adults who love and care for them. And so if you look at their mission statement, to equip every child in Tampa Bay with the knowledge and know-how to become kind, collaborative, and capable citizens. So you see knowledge and know-how kind of have that same start. You see kind, collaborative, and capable. It becomes stickier. It becomes easier to say and recall. They also have three categories of what they do that lead with P's: partnering with trusted adults, preparing teens to lead and succeed, and promoting lifelong outcomes. So this is a really easy one, especially if you're working in Claude or ChatGPT or another large language model. When you are giving some prompts, you might say, can you please, ensure alliteration, or can you please help me find a word that would be alliterative with these, two or three other words. Those are some easy ways that you can kind of integrate your AI tools to help you. You don't want to force alliteration. If it doesn't make sense, don't do it. We don't want to alliterate to kind of force something or reduce clarity. We always want to drive clarity wherever possible. So it's something important to use. Here's just another quick example of alliteration for an organization called Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Foundation, another rare disease organization. And I share this only because alliteration can help you from an internal communications perspective, and your staff and boards really remember some of the things you do. So in the case of this organization, they support families, they improve medical care, and they drive research breakthroughs. So we gave them some alliterative framing devices that can quickly trigger their brain to remember that, oh yeah, we connect, care, and cure. Connect is associated with supporting and connecting families. Care is associated with all we do in the medical centers, and cure is obviously associated with all of our work and research. Doesn't mean you would ever use those frames on its own without context, but some of that alliterative framing can be really helpful as recall to your main messengers, so that they, don't ever forget kind of one of the important aspects of what you do. Another kind of writing technique to create stickier messages is shared suffixes. So this is just when the end of a word sounds the same. In the case of Beta Upsilon Chi or Bucks, a national fraternity we rebranded a few years ago. In their mission, it's living faithfully, leading courageously. So faithfully and courageously kind of have the same ending. Kind of gives it some flow, helps with recall. The Nonprofit Leadership Center does a wonderful conference every year. One of the things that they often share when they're talking about the conference is it's a day of education, conversation, and inspiration. So that education, conversation, inspiration just kind of sounds and flows really nicely. Your mission statement is a really great place to kind of integrate and see that as well. And then just two more. Rhyming. Certainly, we don't want to be this kitschy or forced, but rhyming can be really nice. You heard me mention MDA a little bit earlier. In their messaging, there were some lines that we wrote and created that were helping people live longer and grow stronger. That longer, stronger, again, easy to remember, really nice on the ears to hear. This is just an example from an organization that we rebranded last year called the Caring Collective in the Sarasota area. And their pillars in terms of what they do all end with a word that rhymes. So again, they have that device, operate, collaborate, advocate, that helps them remember what they do. But then it also kind of sounds really nice and flowing when they're talking about we break down barriers that make it easier for nonprofits to operate. We bring change makers together across organizations to collaborate, and we're being a trusted advocate, a nonprofit voice and advocates. So again, sometimes rhyming can be a nice option to create some sticky messages. And then last but not least, parallelism. So essentially, the idea behind parallelism is that our brain latches on to patterns. And so parallelism really speaks to having some patterns in your language, whether words sound the same, like by the people, for the people, would be a good example of that, or whether we're juxtaposing opposites, small, big, high, low, hard, easy. So here's just an example from Boys and Girls of America on some campaigns we worked on during the COVID time period. The world is complicated, helping kids is simple. Just an easy concept. We go from complicated to simple. Another example, kind of that by the people, for the people, is the simple things mean everything for kids who are struggling right now. So simple things mean everything. Using kind of that double word in your sentence or language can just create sort of that stickier language. All right, we're almost toward the end of our time, but I think if there's anything that I would share with you in terms of what I think is the biggest opportunity and differentiator right now, it's to remember to be human. In our world where we are seeing more and more automation and AI-driven content and imagery, I really do believe if we were making 2026 plus beyond predictions, brands who can really be real and authentic and tap into humanity are going to win and maybe even be differentiated as the world kind of continues to evolve around us. Doesn't mean don't use those tools, certainly use those tools, but those who can really be authentically human, I think will continue to win. You have probably seen research that has been coming out in the last couple of weeks, but people are reverting to activities and other kinds of opportunities to be more human again. There's an uptick in knitting, sewing, scrapbooking, typewriting, all journaling, handwritten letters. Yay for handwritten thank you letters. But we're seeing an uptick in this, and no one is better positioned than nonprofits to bring community together, to create a sense of community, and to really make sure that we continue to elevate our humanity in our ever-changing kind of world. So, um, I love this. There's a quote by this brand strategist that I follow. His name's Kevin L. Brown, and he likes to say that stories are like data for the soul, right? So it's really ultimately emotions that are going to drive actions more than facts are. And this is an old research that Vox shared from the CDC back in 2011, but I've never found anything that I love as more to make this point better. But is essentially where donors give versus the rates of mortality related to various issues. And back in 2011, there was exponentially more money raised for breast cancer than the top kind of um, the top most serious issue in terms of mortality, heart disease, because the marketing was positioned as it's our moms, right? Our aunts, our sisters, our loved ones. And so how the communications and story we're telling, you are seeing a difference in terms of seriousness of mortality rates and messaging. And so it's just kind of a good reminder that emotions are really driving actions more than facts. And so how do we tap into that? So there's four kind of strategies related to being human and humanizing your message and making it connect more emotionally that I want to call out for you. We've touched a little bit on this, but These are the things that we see over and over and over and over again with the nonprofits that we start to work with in terms of helping them. Most organizations, when we kind of come in the door, they're continuing to lead with what they do over why it matters. Again, we go back to that so what. So leading with why before what is really important. The Salvation Army, this is a screenshot from a while back that they had on their site. And if you read their mission statement, it's to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ and to meet human needs in his name without discrimination. What they have here is we give kids their parents back. That's why we're doing what we're doing for this particular program. And it connects so emotionally with paired with the photograph. It's just incredibly connective. Like the example I shared with you with the Hillsborough Education Foundation, we want to lead with individuals over initiatives, people over programs. We know from our research, donors give because they want to help another human being. They want to help a student. They want to help a struggling parent. They want to help another mom who's in crisis. They're not giving because your program. They're giving because that program will help that person. And so wherever possible, flip that program lead with that person lead, especially that single person. I know I'm not going to be able to help 5 million people, but I can help that one. And so that can start to help you humanize some of your language, especially language that may, still have some jargon. Third, we love and use every day, all day, what we call universal truths. Universal truths, as I define them, are things that pretty much everyone believes. It would be very, very hard to disagree. Every child deserves every meal. I don't think there's anyone that any of us would meet that would say, I think there's some kids that shouldn't get breakfast today. Or in the case, we have a Metropolitan Ministries example we pulled here, everyone deserves hope. Or from the Early Learning Coalition, the neighborhood where a baby is born shouldn't determine how safe, supported, and successful they become. These are things that immediately humanize the issue, but start with something we all believe in. So in this divisive culture we find ourselves in, we immediately start together on the same page. We start on that same starting line, hand in hand, even if we don't always disagree on how to get there. So universal truths can be really powerful. For your nonprofit, what is it that you believe that everyone else for the most part believes, so we can start on some common ground and really tap into values, really tapping into personal values. And then last but not least, avoid some overused AI terms. Claude and ChatGPT and others are using some patterns over and over and over. If you probably see them a lot if you're active on LinkedIn, but you'll see them on ads, you'll see them in emails. I'm seeing them everywhere. A couple that I would just flag for you, so that you just edit them or make them your own, and just it's a dead ringer for this has been generated by a machine. An approach that writers and advertisers have used for years and is very effective, which is why it's our AI tools have learned them. It leading with a negative and then sharing the positive. It isn't blank, it's why. It's not about X, it's why. It doesn't have to be X, it's why. It isn't, it doesn't, it's not about, and then sharing what it is or does or is about, that is a dead ringer giveaway. I want you to count how many times you see that on LinkedIn or on emails that you receive during the next week. You're going to say, oh, yes. So it's very effective, but now it's becoming saturated and overused. So find your own way to do that. A couple of other words and phrases we've seen being used over and over and over and spitting things out. Lean in, like we leaned into learning. We leaned into this, that, and the other. It was a master class in, just some language like that. Also, we're seeing really like short little questions. The result, question mark. The bottom line, question mark. The truth, question mark. Like those are just very overused kind of approaches. They're effective approaches, which is why our large language models have learned them, because they're learning from humans. But they're becoming overused. And of course, I don't have to tell you all just the overuse of emojis and finding other ways, whether it's using emoticons or just not just being mindful of that as you edit and make it your own. And then last but not least, I want to come back to where we started. Again, brand is not a logo. It's not a social media post. It's not an ad campaign. It's not a meta strategy. Your brand should really be the filter through which you make all of your decisions. And tapping into the insights you know about your audience, but also your values can really help you be more effective with your communications when you really use your values beyond words on a wall or in a Word document saved on your computer somewhere and in reality. Let me give you an example. We rebranded an organization a few years ago, and I was in the car with the CEO on the way to a board meeting. And he said to me, "Gosh, Jessica, I'm having a challenge. There's a board member who doesn't want to be listed on our website because he is afraid it's going to affect his business negatively." And I looked at him and I said, "Is that acting with courage?" Acting with courage is was one of the new brand values, the second brand value that we had developed in partnership with them when we refined their brand values as part of their rebrand. And he looked at me and he was like, I know exactly what I need to do. So using your values as a lens for not only how you communicate, does our communication sound courageous? Are we leading, with bold, tenacious language, if in fact that is one of our values? But are we making decisions based on our values? How do we think and act when we are in a room behind closed doors and no one is ever going to find out? Like that's values, and that's the filter I'm talking about. And it can be incredibly powerful if you harness it as an actionable, practical guide for what you're writing and designing and communicating. And then finally, just one last example of using brand as a lens in a more tactical way. I mentioned the American Cancer Society brand that we rebranded, and this is it right here. And through our audience insights, we learned that women who were going through cancer treatment and wanted help with their appearance-related side effects, they felt overwhelmed. They were completely overwhelmed. They didn't know where to turn. They didn't even know like where to start. The whole wig finding, mastectomy product finding process was just incredibly overwhelming on top of everything else they were dealing with. They prioritized softness and comfort. They were just looking for something that's soft and comfortable. And we look at what we had here, and we have sharp edges. We have cluttered, overwhelming design. And so as we thought about revamping that, we're not just thinking about design and language, but we're also thinking about how do we use their brand insights and brand values as a lens for making decisions. And so here you can see the new brand, the text, the font, the typography that we used, we customized it and rounded it so there were no sharp edges. Everything became round instead of, sharp. We included a lot of white space, calm colors. Women also said, I don't want to be defined by my cancer. So I don't want to be defined by my cancer. So we removed a lot of pink and ribbons and things of that nature because it's really about you feeling normal and not you being defined by what you're going through. And so again, these are just ways that you can take your brand and really listen to what your audiences are saying and making subtle touches like rounding edges or color combinations or words and phrases based on what you're hearing from them that can really make a difference. So here's your screenshot moment. Here are your 5 principles you can take back. Avoid that curse of knowledge, start busting jargon, think about what you're saying and does it connect? Can anyone understand it? Is it accessible and understandable? Stop making it all about you. Lead with your audiences, lead with your donors, lead with your beneficiaries and constituents. Use writing techniques and channel your inner poet that are really going to make your messages sticky and train your AI tools to help you with that. Above all, continue to be human. Continue to be human. Leverage technology, but blend it appropriately with humanity. You will shine in that way. And then always use your brand as a strategic lens. And before Isabella opens it up for questions, I would just leave you with this question to ponder and reflect on as you leave here today is think about that box. What is it that you want people to say when you're not in the room? Do you want people to find the Wendy costume or the Spider-Man suit? And what are you going to do about that in terms of being relentlessly focused on making sure you get what's in that box right? So with that, I'm going to put my contact up and information up on the screen while we have some Q&A. And I'm just so grateful that you joined me today and looking forward to tackling any questions you might have.
We have one question in the chat. I can read it to you unless.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
I can jump in if that's my question. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a startup nonprofit that started in August, and we're beginning our pilot program in April. And I get very passionate and I'm long-winded. But also a huge part of our program is getting longitudinal data and analytics, and we have an expansion expected nationally and to Europe. Every time I bring up longitudinal data and analytics, you get a very big deer in the headlights. I'm just trying to like figure out how to make more of a connection by saying we are the first of its kind model to do that.
Yeah, that's such a great question. I mean, that is exactly what all of this is about. And so I'm excited that this has sparked your thinking of how could we simplify and clarify that. A couple of things, I think, just before you even talk to some of your potential target audiences, using some of these techniques like how could, if I was explaining it to my, if you over explain it to my 9-year-old, how would you explain it? And then level up to maybe 7th grade. And that's a great first place to start. Is there anything that anyone would understand that would help you talk about longitudinal data? So maybe it's
Yeah,
collecting information over a X period of time so we can better understand XYZ. And then finally, I would suggest maybe talking to some of your target audience who isn't maybe an academic or
yeah, that's kind of when we've
more of a lay friendly. Ask, when you hear this, what does it make you think? Or test some sort of messages and see what resonates. You also, with the work you do, want to infuse some urgency. And we didn't talk a lot about urgency today, but it's not enough to just share. We also need to make sure people understand why it's urgent. So those are a few of the tactics that I would suggest, but I think a lot of these principles and just spending some time thinking about them and reflecting on them will hopefully help.
okay, thank you. That
Yeah.
actually makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the great question, Courtney.
Awesome. We have another question in the chat. Leanne is asking, what tips can you share on differentiating your marketing from other organizations with similar missions or programs?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I would say two initial things, and we could have a whole nother webinar on this probably too. But first and foremost, you heard me say look up and around. The first thing I would do is look at all of my competitive set or peer space and see, and we often will map for the clients that we work with, we'll map them on a grid, both visually and verbally. So how are they conveying their mission? What are some of the big brand lines they're using? What are they using in terms of visual identity related to icons, colors, fonts? So that we can see if and where there's white space or opportunity for differentiation from some of those basics. I would also talk to your audiences. Again, this is the power of, interview. I'm not talking, just interview 15 people who are reflective of your community and ask some things about their experiences with different organizations, see if there are some areas of opportunity there. And then finally, voice. We didn't really talk much about voice, but your values and your voice attributes are two important elements of your brand strategy, in addition to your mission, your vision, and your pillars. And so typically your values would align with one voice attribute that essentially defines your personality. So if you were going to say, uh, think about yourself as a person and sort of the 3 or 4 attributes that define you and how you show up and how you speak. That's your voice attributes for your brand. It's how all of your messaging and your visuals show up. And so that is actually a place where you can differentiate. Two organizations with the same mission. One might be edgy, tenacious, bold. Another one may be more humble, pragmatic, academic, intellectual. So, really defining your brand voice and seeing where there might be some opportunities for differentiation in your voice would, from both a verbal perspective, but maybe even from photography and how you show up with colors, can really help you. So, hopefully, those are some helpful kind of tips to get started, but would be more than happy to talk more offline.
Thank you, Jessica. Any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself or you can drop them in the chat. No? Okay. Well, if any questions come up afterwards, Jessica has shared her information, so feel free to direct them to her. But I think we're going to wrap up. I have shared on the chat box our upcoming free webinars, so make sure you check those out. But I want to give a big thank you to Jessica and Round Square for this phenomenal webinar. It was very thoughtful and timely, so thank you so much. And thank you to everyone that has joined us today. As I said, we'll be sharing the recording in the next few days, so be on the lookout for that. And we will be sending a post-webinar survey to your emails very soon. So we ask that you take the time to fill that out for us. If you have any other questions, let us know, but we hope you have a great, wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much, everyone. Appreciate you.
Hey, Jessica, where are you located?
I'm in
Not
Tampa.
too-
I'm
Oh,
in
okay.
Tampa.
You're not too far. I'm exit 1 off out of Florida into Georgia. Okay. All right.
Awesome.
I'm probably
Yeah,
gonna
feel
reach
free to
out to
send me an
you.
email
Okay, thank you.
and connect with me on LinkedIn, everyone. I love to connect with you.
All right. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Good one.